All right, here we have a little topology with some terms that you see. We need to understand these terms because once you do configure NAT overload, which is port address translation, if you were to do a show IP NAT translation, or trans for short, you will see these terms and you need to know what it is that you're looking at. So let's take a look at from left to right these particular terms. You see you have your local computer with the IP address of 192.168.1.1. That is considered the inside local address. Well, to NAT, this is what this particular address represents. But now let's say you ping 1.1.1.26. Well, who's that? Well, that's that web server or that server way out there by that globe that represents the internet. That's the outside local address, which is a public address, but it's still local. And what does local mean? Local means before NAT translation, before the NAT router. So anything that's local, it's either inside local because it's your private locally assigned IP addresses to your internal computers or devices. Outside local is going to be a public address that you're actually trying to get to, but it's still local because it has not gone through that NAT router as of yet. Once it goes through the NAT router, your inside local address will be translated to an inside global address. This is where NAT says, okay, you want to get out to the internet, but you have a private address. I'm going to go ahead and take that private address out, and I'm going to put this IP address that's available for you that the service provider gave us so you're able to get outside and try to do what it is that you're trying to do, whether it's pinging, whether it's telnetting, whether it's just browsing the internet. So the inside local gets turned or translated into an inside global. Now, what about the outside local? What happens to that address? That stays exactly the same. That does not change. That is the public address of that particular server or whatever it is that you're trying to get to. So the only difference is that once it goes through the NAT router, it's considered the outside global address. It's no longer local. Now it's global. So if you are, again, taking your certification and you're given a diagram, let's say like this, or maybe a little bit fancier, but something of this nature, and they're putting arrows pointing to certain locations, and they're asking you, at this point in the NAT process, is this an inside local, outside global, inside global? So you would know what to answer. Just keep in mind, before the NAT router, they're local. After the NAT router, they're global. Your inside local are your private addresses of your devices. Your outside local are the public addresses that you're trying to get to, okay? So this is the NAT terms that you need to understand. Now, one last thing. We say that NAT overload is also called port address translation. And what does that mean? Port address translation, since we only have one IP address for 65,000 private IP addresses to be translated, well, that should bring up a question. Well, that's one IP address. Won't that cause a conflict of some sort? Well, what it does, not only does it take out the private IP address and replace it with the one given by the provider, but it also gives it a different source port number above 1024. So it'll be 1025, 1026, 1027, but with the same IP address. That way there is no problems. That's where the phrase port address translation comes in as well. Destination ports will remain the same. If I'm using port 80 for HTTP, if I'm using port 23 for telnet and so forth, that remains the same. But your source port will be changed. So each device that gets out may have the same IP address, but a different source port number. Just wanted to throw that out there so you understand what port address translation is. All right, so there are your NAT terms. Remember them because you'll be seeing them in your certification.